Introductions. What your reader needs to know. So let's start out with a little activity. What does your reader actually need to know? A student must write a paper in response to the debate, are cell phones harmful or helpful technology in the classroom? The prompt requires he include an outside source he either agrees or disagrees with. He argues cell phones are a distraction in the classroom. So in your interactive handout, do a little free write, okay? And answer these questions. What questions might you have before reading this student's point of view? What information would you need to know before you could understand his argument? So in your introduction, your reader needs to know what the essay is about. What is the debate? What author, article, or book are you responding to? A lot of times in college, we respond to written work. Usually the teacher has you read something and then you have to either agree or disagree or explain something from this article. If that is the main thing you're writing about, that article title and the author needs to be put in your introduction. You have to include what maybe his or her thesis might be. How did that author get to his or her thesis? Is it an event or a list of reasons? How did the student respond? I.e., what is your response? What is your point of view? What is your thesis? So how do we get all of that stuff into an introduction? Here is a simple way to get all of that information into the introduction so that your reader is prepared for your argument. There are 4 guidelines. The first thing you want to do is establish the topic in your essay. Okay, so the very first sentence should be a sentence about the topic that you're writing about. Then 2, you want to introduce the author, the article title, and the thesis of the article that you're responding to. Next, you summarize the list of reasons or events that led the author to his or her thesis. And then lastly, you would state the extent to which you agree or disagree with that author. So those are the 4 guidelines that need to be in your introduction. This does not mean that your introduction is 4 sentences long. It just means that you need to have these 4 things, usually in this order, in your introduction. So let's break it down, okay? The first guideline is what is the topic? So you have to establish the topic from the very beginning of your essay. To do that, you would start your introduction with a sentence or sentences that establishes the topic. Here are 3 examples. The first one, abortion is a heated topic in America right now. Okay, so if an essay started with that statement, it would be clear that this essay will be about abortion, and it will be probably the debate on whether or not it should be legal. Here's another one. America has more prisoners on death row than any other developed country. From this sentence, assume that it will be about American prisons and it will be about death row and maybe abolishing it or keeping it. Then thirdly, smartphones are transforming the way students communicate with each other. So if we started reading an essay, then the first sentence was that sentence. We could assume then that this essay will be about smartphones and how students communicate with each other and how it's transforming the way that they do. How has it changed the way they communicate with each other? So each of these sentences are examples of first sentences of an essay. They're helpful in helping the reader kind of orient them on what they're about to read. What you don't want to do is you don't want to start with prepackaged sayings that you can slap onto any essay, okay? Since the dawn of man, prostitution has existed. I've read this sentence before in essays. You don't want to start that way, okay? Because one, since the dawn of man, we don't really know what was going on completely back then. And you weren't there, right? How do you know what was happening? You weren't there since the dawn of man. So you don't want to start any essay since the beginning of human evolution, okay? In today's modern society, technology has taken over. That's a very, very vague sentence that does not help the reader understand what this essay is going to be about. Okay, so a lot of students will start with in today's modern society. That's really vague, right? Like, as a, essentially you're saying today, right? Your essay should be relevant to a specific topic, and that will be clear if it's talking about something historical. So it wouldn't be necessary to say that in the first place. If we're reading something that's about, a debate going on, it's going to be pretty clear already that it's going to be about today, something going on that's relevant today. Technology has taken over. So that is very, very vague, right? Technology can mean a variety of things. The wheel is a technology, right? So that wouldn't be helpful. The reader might assume, well, what technology are they talking about? A VCR? That's a very old technology, right? So you have to be very, very specific. You don't want to be very vague. Okay, so let's talk about the second guideline. Who are you responding to, and what is the debate? So first, you're going to introduce the author, the article title, and the author's thesis. Okay, this is where those reading steps come in, because if you have an outline of the article that you're reading, you can come up with the thesis that the author was talking about, and then you can put that in your introduction. Okay. Here is an example. All of these articles really do exist. You can go find them online if you'd like to read them. So here's the first one. In Nicholas Carr's Atlantic Monthly article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? He argues that smartphones have shortened his attention span. Okay, so we can tell in this essay that it is responding to an article called Is Google Making Us Stupid? It was published in the Atlantic Monthly, and it is by Nicholas Carr. We also know that Nicholas Carr's thesis is that smartphones are shortening his attention span and affecting his brain and perhaps how he's learning. Okay, here's another example. Phoebe Danziger, in her Slate article, A Peaceful Death, discusses the reasons abortion is a humane choice. Okay, so Phoebe Danziger is the author. This Slate article, that's the publication. Then you have the article title, and then it talks about what she's going to talk about in her essay. It isn't a complete thesis, but it has a lot going for it in terms of assumption, like reasons abortion is a humane choice. We already know that she's agreeing with it and that it is humane in many cases. Here's the third example. In the Huffington Post article, The Fetishizing of Revenge, Eoin Higgins asserts that supporting the death penalty merely supports the notion that the United States has the right to determine who gets to live or die. Okay, so in this example, it starts with the publication, the Huffington Post article, and then there's the article title, The Fetishizing of Revenge. We have the author's name, Eoin Higgins, and then his thesis. He's asserting that supporting the death penalty merely supports the notion. So he's agreeing with somebody, okay, perhaps, or he's taking a stand. He's taking a position, right? And he's deciding that it's a very government thing. The government, it's too much government control, giving the government the permission to put people to death, okay, is too much power. All right. Here's the third guideline. How did the author get to his or her thesis? You provide a list of reasons. Okay, so there's two options here, but you have to read the article closely. Usually, the author is going to break down a list of reasons to support their position, usually a list of arguments. Or they're going to provide a list of events, things that have happened in the world that they're experiencing that is leading them to have some kind of argument or position on a topic. Or it could be a mix of both, a list of reasons and a series of events mixed together that support their main argument. So let's break down the first guideline here in terms of the list of reasons. Okay, so how did the author get to her thesis? What if it is a list of reasons? So Nicholas Carr's article, in Nicholas Carr's Atlantic Monthly article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? He argues that smartphones have shortened his attention span. All right, so let's break this down. His 3 reasons to support the idea that smartphones have shortened his attention span and affected his brain. The first one is a book does not compare to reading on the internet. So that is his first claim. The capacity to remember and memorize details has suffered from reading the popular short style of blogs and articles on the internet. Okay. And then his third reason is that he's losing this ability to memorize. All right. So those 3 added up leads him to believe that smartphones have shortened his attention span. Okay, so what would this look like if we put it in the paragraph, if we put it in the introduction and turned them into complete sentences and added it all together? In Nicholas Carr's Atlantic Monthly article, Is Google Making Us Stupid? He argues that smartphones have shortened his attention span. Carr asserts that reading a book does not compare to reading on the internet. Reading a book requires more concentration. He also states his capacity to remember and memorize details has suffered from reading the popular short clip style of blogs and articles on the internet. Because he does not exercise his ability to memorize, relying mostly on search engines to provide the answers to all of his questions, he is losing this ability. Okay. This is an adequate summary of his article. It includes all of the information the reader would need to know. It provides all the context for essentially your argument when you respond to him. Okay? Here is a list of events that have occurred that got somebody to their thesis. Okay? So if Phoebe Danziger in her Slate article, A Peaceful Death, discusses the reasons she chose to have an abortion. Her first reason was an event. She wanted a child and happy to have a brother for her 2-year-old. 2, the ultrasound revealed many complications. His kidneys may not work. He may not have the ability to breathe on his own. He would die a painful death soon after birth or be on permanent life support. Thirdly, she decided to terminate the pregnancy for humane reasons. Note that these are also reasons. You could say, well, one reason she decided to have the abortion was because it revealed these complications. That's fine, right? You could call these reasons. I would call them events because there are things that have happened, right? Sometimes students will look specifically just for reasons and arguments and ignore events that the authors mention that are critical to their argument. So that's the only reason I make a distinction here, okay? Sometimes the author has a variety. They have both reasons and events, all right? So let's see what this would look like all together. Phoebe Danziger, in her Slate article, A Peaceful Death, discusses the reasons she chose to have an abortion. She desperately wanted a child and happy to have a brother for her 2-year-old. However, the ultrasound revealed many complications. His kidneys may not work. He may not have the ability to breathe on his own, would die a painful death soon after birth, or be on permanent life support. In the end, she decided the most humane decision was to terminate the pregnancy so he would not live a life or die in pain and suffering. Okay, so these are the reasons all added up that create her thesis. We've got all of the important information in here. We've got the author's name, we've got the publication, we've got the article title, we've got her thesis, and we've got all of the events that led to her having this point of view. Okay, so the 4th guideline is to then state your opinion, okay, to provide your point of view. Essentially, what's your response? What's your opinion? And this will be your thesis. It is the extent to which you agree or disagree with an author. In the past that there are 2 sides to every argument. And I'm going to tell you that's not true. There are not 2 sides because people assume that means there are only 2 sides. In fact, there are many sides to every argument. If you think there's only 2 sides, you get stuck into either only agreeing or disagreeing, and you're not really tackling the topic faithfully, right? You're not thoughtfully thinking about the gray side in the middle. Because if you don't think of the gray side, it's going to, your reader, and if your reader doesn't already just fully agree or fully disagree, then, it'll be harder to persuade them, right? So you want to take into account that there's a gray side to every argument, and you might need to establish that for the reader to fully persuade them. So here's a way to easily decide where your position might be. Okay. And it's not just to agree or disagree, although those are options. So here's 4 guidelines. You could completely agree with somebody, right? Totally, completely. You totally agree. The key here is, though, you have to add your own opinion as to why you agree with them. You could mostly agree with somebody, but sort of disagree. You don't have to agree with everything. Maybe almost all the things they talk about you agree with, but then they bring up an argument in their article where you're like, I'm not sure I'm okay with that. So you can mostly agree or sort of disagree. You can mostly disagree and sort of agree, right? So the opposite of the previous one, you know, almost everything this author says, you're like, no way, I'm not on board. But then at the end, you can say, oh, well, maybe there's this one argument that I could take into consideration that I might agree with, okay? And then you can completely disagree, okay? Completely. No matter what your position is, you have to include why, what, and how in your thesis. You can never just simply agree or disagree and just say, I agree with the author, period. That is not a thesis, okay? So here is an example of what you don't want to do. Incomplete. I mostly disagree with the author, but I slightly disagree too. That would be a failing thesis, okay? Because you're not telling us why, what, or how. Here's another example you don't want to do. I mostly agree with the author because I too have had a similar experience. Well, what is this experience? What exactly are you agreeing with? Right? So you need to flesh it out a little bit. You need to reveal everything to the reader. You don't want to hold anything back. Here's a good thesis. The internet doesn't exactly ruin readers' attention spans. In fact, as an educator, I think the internet has made students read more now than ever before, increasing reading comprehension and the desire to read. Okay, so in this example, if you go back in the slides and you look at the summary of Nicholas Carr's Is Google Making Us Stupid, you'd see the context for this thesis. So in this thesis, the author is mostly disagreeing with the author, right? Or in fact, maybe completely disagreeing, because it says doesn't exactly, right? So the internet doesn't exactly ruin readers' attention span. By including doesn't exactly, it might reveal to the reader that they're mostly disagreeing, but there might be something in there that they might be agreeing with, okay? It includes ethos. It provides, someone's authority as an educator. And the idea that this author thinks that the internet has made students read more than ever before, increasing reading comprehension, desire to read. And in this thesis, you might also notice that the author kind of gave you a step-by-step guide as to how they're going to go about arguing their thesis, although that's not necessary. In this thesis, the author did. You would assume that maybe the first body paragraph would establish this idea that students read more than ever before. Then in the next body paragraph, they might break down how that is actually increasing their reading comprehension. They'd provide evidence of that. And then maybe in the third paragraph, they would break down how this also instills a desire to read. And they might put in some data on that or some personal experience from classroom experience about how students now read more. And so now they want to read more. Okay. And it includes how, what, and why. This is a complete thesis. So this is what it would look like all together. Okay. Note that guideline 1 is missing, right? We're missing the establishing the topic, but we'll get to that in a minute. But this is guidelines 2, 3, and 4. Okay. And Nicholas Carr's Atlantic Monthly article is Google Making Us Stupid. He argues that smartphones have shortened his attention span. Carr asserts that reading a book does not compare to reading on the internet. Reading a book requires more concentration. He also states his capacity to remember and memorize details has suffered from reading the popular short style of blogs and articles on the internet. Because he does not exercise his ability to memorize, relying mostly on search engines to provide the answers to all of his questions, he is losing this ability. However, the internet doesn't exactly ruin readers' attention spans. In fact, as an educator, I think the internet has made students read now more than ever before, increasing reading comprehension and the desire to read. Okay, so note how in this example of an introduction, you've got all the context. We know what the author is responding to. We have a nice summary of the article and all of their main points. And at the very end, we know the author's we know the student writer's thesis, right? So the reader of this essay would be very prepared for what this essay is going to be about, what the author is going to be arguing in response to this other author. It establishes the conversation. Okay, here's another example. This one is in reference to or response to Phoebe Danziger's article about abortion. Okay. I fully agree. Note how they just straight up say they fully agree. So we know where they stand on the debate. They know that they've chosen the completely agree guideline. I fully agree with Danziger. Bring a child into the world who will essentially suffer until that child dies is ethically wrong. Abortion isn't just for unwanted children. It's a humane act in many cases. Okay, so in this example, the author again completely agrees with Phoebe Danziger. Okay, we know that this author is going to write about how it is ethically wrong, right? Maybe a paragraph or two might break that down. What are the ethics of keeping somebody alive that is going to die anyway? Abortion isn't just for unwanted children. Okay, so then that's another one. They're probably going to provide some data in one of their paragraphs about the reasons why people have abortions and maybe breaking down some misnomers on the reasons why people have them or don't have them. And then they're going to establish how it's humane, how all of their reasons added together actually reveal how abortion is humane in many cases. Okay. So altogether, this is what it would look like in an introduction. Phoebe Danziger, in her Slate article, A Peaceful Death, discusses the reasons she chose to have an abortion. She desperately wanted a child and happy to have a brother for her 2-year-old. However, the ultrasound revealed many complications. His kidneys may not work. He may not have the ability to breathe on his own. He'd die a painful death soon after birth or be on permanent life support. In the end, she decided the most humane decision was to terminate the pregnancy so she would not live a life or die in pain and suffering. As a result, I fully agree with Danziger. Bringing a child into the world who will essentially suffer until that child dies is ethically wrong. Abortion isn't just for unwanted children. It's a humane act in many cases. Okay, so in this introduction, the reader of this essay would be fully prepared, right? They'd be like, okay, I know the context. I know the debate we're getting into. I know that this student writer is going to respond to Phoebe Danziger. We know the publication, if we wanted to go find it on our own. And then we know the article title. We know their entire thesis and all the events that led up to their thesis. And then at the very end, we have a thesis that explains how, what, and why in response to this article. And then as the essay goes on, the reader can predict where the essay is going to go, what are the arguments perhaps, and maybe even guess as to some of the evidence that they might provide or the arguments that they might be responding to throughout the essay. Okay. So in your interactive handout, I would like you to decide where this author stands. So this is a thesis in response to the article about the death penalty, and you can review those slides. You can go back and read the summary on there. Okay. And then you can decide where you think this author stands. And then those 4 choices, right? Do they completely agree with Eo and Higgins? Do they completely disagree? Or are they somewhere in the middle? This author stands, and here is their thesis. Although the death penalty may give the government the right to decide who lives or dies, which gives the government more power than it should have, the death penalty exists for more than Higginson's reasons. It exists to deter crime and scare criminals into complying with the law, preventing crimes and victims in the first place. So go ahead and decide. Does this author completely agree with Eo and Higgins? Do they completely disagree? Do they mostly agree and somewhat disagree, or do they mostly disagree and somewhat agree? You decide. Okay. All together now. The death penalty is a heated debate in America right now. In the Huffington Post article, The Fetishizing of Revenge, Eo and Higgins asserts that defending the death penalty merely supports the notion that the United States has the right to determine who gets to live or die. He argues that studies have shown killing an inmate does not quell the victim's family's loss, nor is it fair for the system without flaws. Although the death penalty may give the government the right to decide who lives or dies, which gives the government more power than it should have, the death penalty exists for more than Higginson's reasons. It exists to deter crime and scare criminals into complying with the law, preventing the crimes and victims in the first place. Okay, so we've got everything we need here. We actually have all 4 guidelines in this introduction. We have a sentence that establishes the debate. For example, the death penalty is a heated debate in America right now, right? That sentence establishes the debate. We know it's going to be about the death penalty. We know it's going to participate in the conversation or the debate of the death penalty, specifically in the United States. Okay, then we've got the second guideline. We've got the author's name, we got the article title, and we got the thesis. All right, we got even the publication. Huffington Post article. It was published in Huffington Post. The title of the article is Fetishizing of Revenge. The author's name is Eoin Higgins. We've got his thesis about the death penalty. Then they provide a list of reasons, okay, about how, his thesis that the death penalty just gives the government more power than it should have, right? Deciding who gets to live and who gets to die. And he has all his reasons. That provides the context, right? So we know the debate and we know what one of the key players in this debate are. Then the other key player, which is you, or which is the student writer, right? They're going to respond to this article, and they do so in the end. And I'm not, depending on what you answered in the previous activity, in my opinion, I think that the student writer here mostly disagrees, but somewhat agrees. Right? It says, although the death penalty may give the government the right to decide who lives or dies, which gives the government more power than it should have. The fact that they say that there's more power than it should have means that this student writer does kind of throw a bone to the other author, like, hey, I do agree with Eoin Higgins on that point. The government should not have that right necessarily. That gives them more power than they should have. That is an argument, and in that sense, they are agreeing. But the word although, that transition, essentially alerts the reader to the idea that we're going to be switching gears here, and we're going to be saying, okay, I sort of agree with them, but I mostly disagree, and these are my reasons, right? It exists to deter crime and scare criminals. That'll probably be one body paragraph, preventing crimes and victims in the first place. And note here that there might, they didn't reveal every single one of their arguments. Right? There might be more arguments in their essay, but this is the sum total of them. And in fact, maybe even the first body paragraph, they're going to break down why they somewhat agree. They might start with, hey, okay, I kind of agree. Here's my first point. But then they're going to go through the rest of the essay and completely disagree with this author.